Hello and welcome to Revenue Unscripted. I'm Jennica Dixon, president at Slattery Sales Group, and every episode here we dive into the human side of growth, how real organizations build high-performing sales cultures, avoid costly mistakes, and turn complex deals into predictable growth. Today I am joined by Sandella Gansheimer. She's a go-to-market executive driving brand and revenue expansion across the competitive pet and outdoor industries with some of the world's top brands. Most recently serving as Chief Revenue Officer at Roughwear, Sandella is recognized for her ability to harmonize global sales, distribution, and customer experience strategy with a relentless focus on sustainable growth. Throughout roles at Mars, a Tractor Supply Company, and Pet Safe brands, Sandella has excelled at building high-performing teams and unlocking new growth channels. She has a leadership style rooted in empowerment, kindness, and radical support, and believes that business development and human-centric leadership are not mutually exclusive, but rather deeply codependent. As a mother of two daughters, she's a vocal advocate for women leaders and women in sales and currently resides in beautiful Bend, Oregon. And we are going to have a blast today. We're going to talk about navigating complex, high stakes enterprise sales, the importance of humility and listening over ego. And you can really make a lot more money with humility
There you go.
and serving the customer instead of selling to them. And we'll talk about sitting on the same side of the desk and more. So, listeners, you are in for a treat. I am so looking forward to this. And Sandella, welcome to Revenue Unscripted.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, so you are joining us from beautiful Oregon. What is life like there right now?
Well, it doesn't look like this. I'll tell you that. We have very little snow at the moment, which is causing a little bit of like a clinical depression across the town. But other than that, yeah, life is good. Bend is great. The community is so entrepreneurial. And just a very kind community, and it makes for just a great place to grow up and figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So yeah, I'm loving it. I'm like a kid in a candy store, except no snow.
That's fantastic. Oh, I love that. We're all still figuring out what we want to do when we grow up.
Yeah, I'll let you know
Yeah.
when I do.
Awesome. I'm still holding out for astronaut personally. So
Yes.
it may yet happen.
There's been a wide range throughout my throughout my interests for sure.
Oh, and here we are talking about sales. That's not necessarily the first thing that our parents were hoping that we would be sitting here talking about in business, but here we are. And one of the things that I love to do in this show, and I've got a heart for this because I've known so many leaders and founders who have incredible value that they're bringing to the marketplace. But as soon as humans are part of their go to market strategy, there ends up being some variability, some volatility in results because humans are variables and human salespeople are just a factor in that complexity. And it can be hard to run a company when you have humans as part of your sales team. So I'm so excited to ask you a whole bunch of questions
Okay.
about leading sales teams and running really big, complex sales. So I've got to ask, I got to come in with the big one. You have lived in the biggest retail negotiations. I mean, you've been with Walmart, Target, Amazon. What do um, other executives or even outsiders like me misunderstand about what really goes down in those rooms?
I think there's a few things. First and foremost, I would say, by the time you make it to the negotiation room, or by the time you make it into a meeting with larger players in the market, your brand has stood out. There's been something that's resonated with them, and typically there's a level of trust, I think, that starts the conversation, with larger retailers, and then it's up to us, really, as salespeople and as leaders, to continue to foster and treat that trust with the utmost respect. And that's where a lot of times, folks will start to stumble with the idea that they're coming in with the solution, and they're coming in with a solution. But if they don't stop and really, seek to understand, what matters most to the Walmart consumer, what success looks like, for Amazon, or what the growth, potential is for a target or for that buyer within that role, they miss the mark. And, the worst thing that can happen is when a salesperson comes in and says, like, I've got it all figured out for you. Because you don't get to be a buyer in these organizations without being incredibly savvy and knowing your business incredibly well. So that's
Right.
that's some of the big stuff. Yeah, for sure.
I I love that. Because I know in our earlier conversation, you said something that really stuck with me, and that is your buyers know their customer and market better than anyone.
That's right.
So when when let's say a human seller or team walks in, how should sellers act differently because of that? If they're trying to get something awesome to market, how should
Yeah,
that change?
I think first and foremost, respect the fact that, this person is giving you their time. And so, again, you've built something in order to be in front of them. And respecting someone's time, time is our most precious commodity.
Mm,
And when you're dealing with an Amazon, a Walmart, if you're dealing with a local retailer, the size really doesn't matter. The commodity of time is just as precious. And so it's really about sitting down and understanding first and foremost, what they're looking for, what are they solving for, how's their business? Ask them, how's business? And you'll learn a lot because a lot of times they're willing to share, especially in those moments. They're excited about things, they have pain points, they have things they're solving for, and you can be part of that solution. But you're really only going to crack that code if you're willing to consider sitting on the same side of the desk as them versus opposite sides. So it's not an us versus them. It's not a I'm going to get this in. This is what's best for my company. Salespeople walk a fine line between company and customer, and just knowing how to navigate that. It's not always a straight line. Sometimes you're more customer, sometimes you're more company, and the right type of salesperson does that to protect both entities. And I would say that's one of those areas where it's just so important to listen more than you talk, to understand that time is valuable, to not come in with your own agenda, but rather come in with, an idea of what the problem may be, or an idea of what the solution or the product is that could help them move to the next level. But be willing to listen, because again, what's important to you may not be all that important to them. And so the idea that we have all the answers before we sit at the table, it doesn't happen. You want to become their colleague. You're not an adversary. You're very much a colleague of theirs. And that's where sitting on the same side of the desk as them and having a professional, respectful conversation as colleagues can go so much further than, again, just trying to shove product or services or this thing that your boss has said you got to sell more of or do more of. Keep in mind that there's a company need, obviously, but it has to fit a proposition that's a high felt need, that's going to bring a unique solution to their customers or to their organization, and it has to be something that is rooted in a mutual go forward. And I think if you start from listening and asking questions and, providing them with the information about who you are, who your company is, but also being very willing to understand that, all of these retailers, they sell stuff 100%. But, they're data companies, and they're always gonna have at their fingertips way more data than we could ever have access to. So they do know their customers, they do know their challenges, they know their business exceptionally well. And so it's always a good idea to listen and try to figure out how you 2 are colleagues versus, sales and buyers. It's less of a less enticing to buyers typically if you think you've got the solutions already, so.
oh my goodness, it's so true. I love that. It's there's a thing that we teach when we're working with sales teams, and we help them understand when you hit the marketplace. And I mean, this is something that we've explained to founders as well, because founders often, I mean, the reason that they founded a company is because they've got a great idea that
Yep.
can save lives, change lives, bring incredible value to the marketplace, and solve a problem. The reason we're hitting the marketplace at all is because we believe we have a solution to a problem that we understand really well.
Mhm.
And so that sounds fine until you kind of follow that to its logical conclusion. And what we're doing at Hello is basically saying, hey, you've got a problem. I probably know
Mm,
more about it than you do, and I'm here to help you solve it. You
that's
are
right.
welcome. Like,
That's right.
that's our starting point at hello.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think sometimes we overlook, like, we're not starting necessarily on neutral ground. We're kind of in the hole in terms of making that dynamic happen smoothly in a
Yeah.
conversation because nobody's gonna thank you for pointing out that they've been doing it wrong without you.
That's right. Well, and the other side of it as well is, you are draining the most precious commodity, which is time.
Yes.
And so, there is a sense that you want to make sure that you convey that time is valued, that you appreciate the time that's being given, and you want to use that time as best as possible. And the last thing you want to do is assume that you do have all the answers. There's no doubt whether it's a founder, your very best salesperson, the most eager guy or gal right out of an MBA. Like, yeah, the solution is there. The product is great. You were hired. You believe in it. You're saluting the flag that the brand is raising. But ultimately, you really have to think about, what matters most to, the customer, and ultimately, how does that serve them, and how does it serve their end user? And that's really the sort of the crux of it, right? It's not the pricing. People will pay for the right products. Price sensitivity these days. Folks have products that are less expensive, and there's premium products, and there's everything in the middle. So that's not really the value proposition that any one entity is going to buy off of solely. It's obviously a conversation that happens within the process, but ultimately, if a buyer is at a place where they're hung up on your pricing, they don't believe in your product, or they
Right.
don't believe that it's solving for something that is incremental to what they already do. They already spend time on, and what their customers, their consumers, advocates within the marketplace would tell them is what they need. And that's, if it gets into that sort of place, you've lost their belief or their faith. You had it because you got the meeting, but something happened along the way, and they no longer have that full faith, because the one thing anyone can fall back on is it's too expensive, or it's not the right pricing proposition, or it's not how we've done that in the past. And most buyers these days, all buyers these days, have the data to really be able to figure out how to make something as simple as pricing in the marketplace, or the overall value get conveyed within a product and within a proposition.
Oh, that's so true. And what you're describing is a very collaborative process of both parties coming to a place of value.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because you have been in the negotiating rooms
Mhm.
of some very large retailers. In fact, I remember you telling me when you walked into the Walmart negotiating room, those rooms, like you recognize it because that room had literally been in your textbook.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
hallowed space.
yes. So I got to ask, what did it feel like to be in one of those for real?
I think it's fair to say that when you're new in your career and you get that opportunity. For me, it was a little unexpected. I started with Mars Pet Care, on a Monday, and they said, "Hey, guess what? You're now going to be working on the Walmart Inc. business. Here's a presentation, and you need to give it tomorrow. So you need to hop on the jet, get down there to Bentonville, and don't screw it up." So I think, like,
Oh boy.
my entry into those rooms were really, I was voluntold to go do something,
Uh-huh.
but it was definitely a jumping off point in my career. And yeah, I sat in this, baby blue room. They were all baby blue. They were little tiny, like, closets. They had the glass door in the front, and I sat in that room and I thought, "Oh my gosh, like, I'm among giants, and I'm still new in my career. I'm brand new to this company." And just knowing that there were billions of dollars that were flowing through these rooms in a given day, month, week, year, was humbling. And it was, yeah, I remember sitting there and being like, thinking to myself, of course, because felt like a tourist. I remember thinking to myself, like, this looks just like the textbook. Okay. Yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
remember
awesome.
that, you know? So, but yeah, it's very hallowed space. And, that is really what I always tried to remember was just the honor that it is to be there. The trust that your company is putting into you as well as what the customer's putting there. And just the idea that, this is one piece of what makes them successful. It's never the thing that's going to solve all the woes. And it was at that moment, I was a very small cog in a very big wheel, and I was just thrilled to be there.
That's awesome. Man,
Yeah.
so as you think about being collaborative with your prospect, I'm wondering about the dynamic. What's different about selling to those big companies when your customer has massive leverage and you still need the partnership? How
Yeah.
does that, what's different about selling in those rooms when the other side really does have massive leverage? Because I would imagine that perhaps feeds some of the combative approach that some people might have
Yeah.
to the negotiation. But I'm curious to know what is your take on that, and what is different about selling in those rooms?
You know, yes, I think, using Walmart as an example, there's always an undertone of trepidation in some way. Oh, you're on the Walmart account, or oh, and a lot of that is it's the rhetoric that we're feeding ourselves. Because when you're in those high stakes negotiations, when you're in those moments where your customer does have incredible leverage in the marketplace with your competition, with their own brands, whatever it happens to be, it's a don't screw it up. And, there's something that, I think I was given the gift of perspective fairly young in life. My dad was sick the majority of my life, and it was kind of one of those things. Like, we knew time was a very precious commodity for us as a family, and so it drove a perspective. And whether it was my first time or whether it was an associate that I was mentoring, or if it was a team that I was leading and it was their first time, you know your relationship, the business, the deal should always be greater than any one interaction. So when I would have folks say to me like, "Well, I don't want to screw it up. I don't want to lose the Walmart business." I was like, "Look, I haven't lost it yet, and mistakes happen all the time. You're a human. The person on the other side of the desk is a human. Approach it with the idea that, yes, this is important, but there should be perspective. I used to
Right.
say this all the time. It's only dog collars. And,
Oh,
it's just a moment of sort of like level setting, right? And listen, I haven't always gotten it right. I've been the bull in the china shop. I've had to learn those things. I certainly have, like, I once tried to get myself kicked out of a meeting. Like, I know when it's not going as well.
oh
Um
my goodness. Can I ask you about that one actually? Because
yes.
what you just described, excuse me, what you just described is, I think, a wonderful level of grace for yourself, for your team, because we aren't perfect. We are humans. And I think that's one of the things that is unique about selling. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a human to human art, and you're asking other people to change their behavior and do something new with you or continue a business with you. And that's not easy,
Yeah,
and it's so variable, and things can get screwed up more than they can when you put a number into the Excel cell. It stays there, like, it's not
that's
gonna
right.
change until you can go fix it, but people, I mean, oh, what variables, and I love the grace that you have for yourself and your team, like, this, you're not gonna lose it right now.
No.
So, can you walk us through that moment where you tried to get yourself kicked out of a meeting? Because the perspective on that is fantastic.
I am happy to do that, but I have to give a shout out to my former colleague who we were kind of like Bert and Ernie. We did everything kind of in tandem together. She was the internal version of me. I was external, she was internal. And we were building this business in food, drug, and mass. And her name's Ina Mullins, and she's brilliant, just unbelievable. And like I said, she's the Bert. I was always the Ernie. So when we would go into these meetings with customers, Ina would never look at me, never. I could sit there and just stare at her like she would not look at me in meetings because she knew there was a chance that I was, if I got engaged with somebody's eye contact, there's a very good chance I might, start to crack jokes or act like a dummy. So she wouldn't look at me in meetings,
I
and
love
we're in a we were in a meeting. She's brilliant. We were in a meeting, and it wasn't going well. And to be quite frank, we had an amazing product. There wasn't anything like it in the market. We were willing to offer this retailer, it was Walmart. We were willing to offer them, a 25 to 30% discount to any other retailer in the market. It was really going to be a disruptive way to break into this category that we believed they had a massive opportunity with. And we had the data, we had the shopper data, we had all those things. And, what I assumed was that the dollars, the revenue, the opportunity, the discount in the market were all the things that the buyer cared about. But there was one that I was discounting tremendously, and that was that Walmart over the years has made a massive shift to being a house of brands and carrying brands and catering to a wide spectrum of customers and customers that care about brands, customers that buy private label across the board. There's no shame in Walmart's game. And I love that. They're there to serve the customer and to make lives better through value and through having the solutions they need.
right.
And, what we were discounting was the idea that this buyer wouldn't care about the brand, that it was the discount, it was all of these other things, her margin, all these things that were going to be great. And so we started, and she got right to it and said, okay, so what's the brand going to be? Because when she heard the discount in the marketplace, she figured we were somebody who was looking for, a differentiated brand, something that was going to be different from like a specialty business. We said, well, it's really great. It's going to be this brand, and we'll use all the same wording, all the same this, all the same that. And she said, I don't want that brand. And she was right. She said, I
Ooh.
don't want to grow another brand for you. Like, Walmart can
Oh,
do that. But I don't want to do that. I want the brand you're selling to everyone else. And I want the discount in the marketplace. And I want the value to my consumers. And I want to use the same marketing and verbiage and all those things. Like if you give me a brand that no one's ever heard of, I'm your marketing agency. And
right.
I shouldn't do that. Like, you're the brand, you should own the marketing. And she said, I don't want that. And I pushed. And I said, well, we've got a a channel strategy for our brand. And I was just digging deeper, right? So now your box, what you sell, who signs your paycheck isn't good enough for my brand. My brand is not even our premium brand was not even a percent of what their total revenue as an
Right.
organization was. Like, again, like, it was this odd dynamic. And I kept saying, like, look, you can be first to market. How long do you want this? I'll give you 2 years exclusivity. I kept pushing and kept pushing. And she just got redder and redder because that wasn't, they have bosses. Everybody's got a boss. My boss said, go sell this thing, and convince them that this is what they need and how they should have it and how it should be positioned. Her boss was giving her directives too. And they had been very clear in the media to their customers and to their buying teams that, they were going to be a house of brands as well as own brands and that they were going to serve a greater customer base. And we were insulting her. And I could
Oh,
see it. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I finally hit the brakes. Like it took me a minute, but I hit the brakes and I said, you know what? I can see that I've disappointed you today. And would you like me to leave? I was like, we can pack up. I've wasted your time because I have not brought a product and a proposition to you that is important to you and hits all the things that are important to you. And I think it's probably best if we leave. And you know what? I'll go back. We'll figure out if we can come back with something else. I'd ask for the grace to be able to come back, but I'm sorry. I didn't I missed the mark. And I don't want to argue with you. I do want to partner with you. It was the only time my colleague Ina gave me the side eye because I was actively getting myself kicked out of the meeting.
oh,
And it was interesting. It was a pivot point. And the buyer took a deep breath and she said, no, thank you for saying that. You're right. Like we have to have the same goals. We have to have the same idea of what's important, but I don't want you to leave. She's like, instead, why don't we use the time so that I can outline exactly what I would need to say yes? And I was like, "That's a gift beyond gifts." And I was like, "I would love that." And she
Wow.
did. She articulated it wasn't that she didn't believe in the product. It wasn't that she didn't believe us. In fact, this was a buyer who had been in the category for so long that, you know, there were multiple times where she had reached out to our organization saying like, "Hey, I think this would be a really great product for us." We walked in and just had the audacity to say, everything else we can fulfill, but the one thing that matters to you. And what we're saying is our little brand is more important than your brand, your directives, and what helps you be successful in your org and with your boss. And yeah, she outlined everything that we would need. It took a while. It took a lot of conversations internally, but we ended up coming back to the table with the branded solution, with the 25%, 30% discount to the marketplace, and they rewarded us for that. And they gave us the placement and they gave us the platform. And, what I see now out of that is continued growth and partnership that, quite frankly, in that moment, I was just missing the mark. And I had so many things inside this fear that, well, she's gonna ask me for the national brand, and nobody in my building is gonna be happy, and I'm not gonna get the sale, and all these things about me were coming in my head, and I
Mm.
just needed to stop selling and just start serving. And
Wow.
yeah, the company became much more successful as a result of listening and being willing to be a partner versus an adversary on the other side of the table.
Oh, man, that takes humility, though. That takes
I
humility.
I
Oh, that's
am
hard.
reminded regularly by Ina that I tried to get myself kicked out of like the largest retailer, largest
Right.
brick
What
and
are you
mortar
doing?
retailer in the world. Like,
We don't
yeah,
have a
she's like,
playbook for this.
remember that time you tried to get yourself kicked out of a meeting? I was like, yeah, that was
Oh,
I
oh,
had to take a time out for sure. So
painful, but what an incredible lesson about the importance of hitting that pause. Because I I grew up in the sales industry, so
mhm.
I have to laugh because what you're describing is counter to much of the prevailing wisdom that, was so prevalent in the water, especially in the 20th century when, I was growing up, and it was very, "Push, go get 'em,"
Yeah.
very I love using hunting as an analogy, so I love our hunters out there, but it was very hunting heavy,
Mhm.
and I think that can be very helpful in some cases, but what you're describing when it's a complex sale and there are negotiations and multiple discussions with multiple players in the cast of characters, ego can really derail a lot. It can be a very expensive mistake to
Yeah.
bring ego to the table instead of, I mean, the pivot that you made mid conversation is remarkable and probably quite lucrative of a move. And so I have like 3 different questions that are all in my brain, and I have to, condense them down because there's so many different ways I wanna go here. But I'm speaking of the humility piece particularly, um, and it's so hard to do. How do you know when you're pushing too hard and it's time to kind of put not necessarily put the ego on the back burner and lead with humility instead, but that's kind of where I'm going.
Mhm.
How do you know when you're pushing too hard and it's time to take a moment like you did and say, wait, 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 am I pushing myself here, or am I actually moving in my customer's best interest? Which, let's face it, at the end of the day, is going to be much more lucrative for all of us.
That's right.
how,
Yeah.
how do you know? Are there
You know, yeah, you've got a human on the other side of the desk. And
so true?
as much as we try to hide behind screens and things like that, body language tells you a lot. And when you see someone sit back, when you see them squint their eyes, when you see them purse their lips or cross their arms, when they start skipping through the presentation because you're not hitting on what they care about, but they're searching for those things that they could possibly care about, those are all signs. Beyond that, we're animals. And so we have a fight or flight, and you can feel it in your own body when you're trying to die on a hill that no one else thinks you should die on. And, and the buyer has no interest as to whether or not you live or die at this point because
Right.
you're wasting their time and everything else. And you feel it internally, you see it externally. And ultimately, I think, when you start thinking through your thoughts of, I have to get this done, I have to convince them, I have to, you've lost it. Because salespeople are meant to serve. My mentor and one of my very best friends, who actually got me into sales, a guy by the name of Mike Blaylock, told my team. I had him speak to my team at Roughwear, and I said, Mike, what's that one pearl of wisdom? And he said, stop selling and start serving. And he
Mm,
said, you'll get a seat at the table, but what you do with that seat's so important. And you see it a lot in the body language. You do see it when they start to challenge you. Like I said, these folks will always know more than you about their business, their consumer. And when they start to really begin to challenge you because they're frustrated versus because it's a dialogue where everyone can win by having a healthy amount of dialogue and a good healthy debate. The best relationships are ones that and best partnerships are ones where you can have a healthy debate and it remains respectful and it remains, solution focused.
right.
When you start to lose the solution focus and it's just a challenge because, you're hitting on something that is core to them and in the opposite direction, or they're frustrated or they don't like your mannerisms, because you're no longer having a discussion or even, debating to get to a solution. You're so far apart and you're both trying to defend your own land, your own flags, your own sense of ego, and you feel it internally and you see it externally. And ultimately, it's not solution based at that point.
No, it's so true, and what what you're describing requires, I believe the acronym is now EQ, the emotional intelligence,
Yes.
the emotional quotient, the ability to read a room, pick up on signals, pay attention to what's going on, and that is a skill that I think was overlooked, at least when I was growing up, and,
Yeah.
I mean, I was dragged to all the sales conferences. That was
Oh, yeah.
not something that was necessarily taught, and it was always very interesting because my dad, when, I was growing up in the family business, he always was really pushing humility
Hmm.
and listening in a way that, I wasn't hearing in other parts of the marketplace, and what's interesting, as I'm sure you have seen over the years, and I have seen over the years, an increase in the number of women in sales.
Yes.
And in broad strokes, I mean, not all of us, but my EQ can be very low sometimes, but in broad strokes, I think that women carry with them into sales skills that are of
Hmm.
incredibly high value
Hmm.
in these complex, high negotiation, high stakes deals where you may have to read the signals off of 8 people in a room in a moment,
Yeah.
and that can be hard to learn. So I would love to hear your perspective. I mean, both of my parents were in high-tech enterprise sales way back in the day, including my mom, and she rocked in sales, and it was really fun for me to grow up with my parents with that kind of legacy. I would love to hear your experience because you've led teams, you've seen, women in sales and what they can bring to the equation. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, development in sales.
You know, Here's what I would say. You hit the nail on the head earlier when you said there is a mentality that salespeople are hunters, hunters, hunters. And, you don't approach, a leopard by going like, hey, if it's all right, follow me back to my den. I need to feed my family. What do? You ambush, you surprise, you go on the attack. And listen, there is a reason and a style and a season for everything in any room that you're in.
Yeah.
But there's the misnomer that hunting is aggressive. And, what I have seen from female colleagues and from my male colleagues that have a less of an aggressive stance or less of a like, this is do or die and more of a collaborative stance is I've seen these hunters who are hunting the opportunity gather the right people, the right information, and the right set of parameters to bring in front of a buyer. And I think women do that incredibly well.
Right.
Whether it's the CEO mom or it's, the young entrepreneur, or whether it's, someone somewhere in the middle of their career and in the middle of their life circumstances, women are multitasking all the time. And, one of the ways that they accomplish that is by listening a lot of times more than they talk. I'm guilty probably of the opposite, but I surround myself with other people that can get it right. And then I try to learn from them as I sit on a podcast where all I'm doing is talking. But I think it's interesting the way in which I have watched my male counterparts and my female counterparts and folks that have been on my team prepare for things. And it's a lot of times with the kind of traditional hunter mentality. It's, well, this is what it'll get us. And, if I give an opportunity or an account or, some sort of, situation to, their female counterpart, it's, well, what are they trying to solve for? What sales do they already do in this arena? Why are we different? Can we go to the store and look at the shelf? Can I, let me go online and see how they're communicating, what their needs are. And they're just gathering information. It doesn't mean that they're not going to hunt. They're still going to go after that cheetah or that leopard, but
Right.
it's the way in which you approach it. And, if you walk up to it and you try to wrestle it, barehanded, you're at least going to have some bruises somewhere in your career.
You only get one chance.
If you've gathered the tools you need, the spears and, the
Right.
camouflage, you're likely to be a little more successful and bring somebody with you. And that's one of the things that I've always admired about my female counterparts is like the door is open. They'll go
Right.
to the engineering team. When I was at PetSafe Brands, you know, uh, uh, we'd go to the engineering team and say, "Hey, do you want to be involved in this call, or help us understand what's most important. Help us understand what we can be the voice for you, in this product." Or we would go to marketing and say, "Hey, we'd love to have a marketing person with us." Or category management. Our category managers always knew more than we did about the product and the customer and the consumer. We'd gather the right team, and then we would go in the sense that I had to know everything or that, I had to have all the answers. I actually probably talk the least in those moments because I let the experts, the customer who knows his or her customer, their consumer, their needs, their wants, their problems, and the folks in my organization that have tried to help solve for those things. And I put those folks in a room. And most of those folks are not, inherent salespeople. So it's a conversation among colleagues where I don't have to try to jump on the back of the cheetah and and wrestle it to the ground. Like, there's everybody is bringing their own set of tools and their own sets of abilities, and we're doing this together. And it ends up that a lot of times the leopard or the cheetah comes willingly,
Yes.
because there's a sense of trust that's built there. And
Yes.
I have seen women do it really well. And I've um, there's always a little bit of like this uncomfortableness in my gut when I say something like, "Well, I see women that do this well," or "Men don't do this." At the end of
Right.
the day, we're all salespeople, and it's just a matter of the skills and some of the things that come a little bit more, naturally or innately in one area or another. But it's open for everybody to take advantage of. And like I said, there's times where you got to try to wrestle the cat to the ground, but
Yep.
those are painful for everyone, the cat as well as the hunter. So, the other way tends to work a little bit better some of the time,
Yes,
maybe a little bit more.
exactly.
So,
If you
yeah,
only have one shot, then maybe, but if you're gonna need to get back in that door again, then
that's
a
right.
little bit of EQ can
That's
really
right.
go a long way.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have seen ego play out poorly, because 'cause I'm thinking back to, my career and the things that we've seen in Slattery Sales Group, and I have seen cases where, ego can derail a conversation, if not almost entirely a relationship.
Yeah.
And this doesn't always happen because somebody's a jerk. Sometimes it's just they don't necessarily realize that they're doing it, and sometimes it's exactly when actually what you're describing is somebody like, let's say, the salesperson or the executive in charge of this relationship is gathering the team, and they
Mhm.
may not give the team the directive of this is how we're going to fly this plane.
That's
This is
right.
who's in charge. This is what we're going to do, and egos can trip things up, and I've seen it go down. I've seen the cleanup that has to happen afterwards. So I'm curious if you have seen any scenarios like that in your career.
I have. I lived a pretty big one, fairly early on,
Ooh,
and it certainly did teach me a lesson. I worked on the part of the business, when I was with Mars Pet Care. I was working on the private label side of the business, and there's a lot of really amazing things that go into amazing thinking, insights that go into creating a private label portfolio. And private label is important to buyers. It's their own brand, it's their company's brand. A lot of times it's the basis of an entry into a category for their customers. It's a way that brands, that retailers will build trust with their customers. And a lot of times, again, you're solving for something that, uh, there's a need in the marketplace. And the price continuum goes from value all the way to premium. And I was part of an organization where they had value and they had premium, and they served Walmart in both capacities. And we had a joint business planning meeting that was a very, very big deal. It took weeks to prepare. It was a very big deal, and we went down in front of the buyers. In fact, I'll never forget. It was almost like stadium seating. Like there was a lot of us, and then you'd get to be at the main table. Then you would sit back, and then more people would come. It was we had all kinds of people.
wow.
At the time, Mars had a private jet. They called it the Pet Jet. It was a
That's
from it from
awesome.
it, yeah, it was from an acquisition that they had made, and that's not really who Mars is. So they ended up
Right.
figuring out what to do with it. But for a while there, to get to Bentonville, that was the fastest and easiest way to bring groups of people, and so they kept it
Yeah,
for a
it's not
while.
easy
And
to get to Bentonville.
no, no, it is not. And so so they brought the pet jet down. There were so many people for this meeting. The pet jet had to make 2 trips. I was the lowest on the totem pole, so I was on the second trip. In fact, funny story, I actually sat in the bathroom on the jet, which
What?
it was a seat. Yeah,
Oh my word.
because that's how low on the totem pole I was. And
Oh my goodness,
and
I hope there was a seatbelt. Wow.
they you believe it or not, there is a seatbelt in the toilet. It was the weirdest thing. But yes, that's where I sat. So you can just imagine, my pay grade versus everyone else's. And I was just excited to be there, honestly. And we got into the meeting, and the meeting was going great, going really well. And of course, it always drives dialogue. It condenses time frames, the whole thing. And so we were starting to get a little itchy with time. And someone who was very much at a higher pay grade than myself took the liberty to say, "Well, Sandella, why don't you just go sit back down? We don't want to talk about that. They don't care about that. You can cover that at a different time."
Oh,
And at the time, there was 2 women buyers who I still am like just almost unhealthily obsessed with, because they're incredible leaders. And they've just been, I mean, they did so much in the industry during their time. And one of them was a senior buyer, and she stopped for a minute and she said, "I'm sorry, did you just tell me what's most important, what I care about?" And she
whoa.
said, "You go sit in the back." And she said, "Sandella, go ahead, present what you were going to present."
Huh.
And of course I was like, okay. So, I'm presenting everything, and she's asking questions, super engaged. I got through my presentation. She was like, "I loved it. Send me the electronic copy of it. I want to go through this again. I think we have an opportunity there." I said, "Okay, great." And I went and sat, in the back of the room again. And of course, the executive who had said they don't care about it, he was embarrassed. And he took that and misplaced his anger toward me.
Oh dear.
And so we got back to the airport, and of course, there's somebody who outranked him, and this gentleman was saying, "Okay, you're going to be on the jet. You're going to be on the jet." And he said, "Sandella, you get the toilet seat on the first flight." And the guy who had told me to hush and mind my own business had said, "Well, wait a second, I want to be on the first one." And I tell you what, that executive really taught me a lot in that moment. His The response from the highest ranking person in the group said, "You didn't earn it." And he said, "How dare you think that anything that we have to present is more important than what they care about?" And he was
Oh.
like, "You're going to sit at this airport and think about what you did." And the whole time I was like, "Oh my gosh." And he said, "Sandella, get on the jet. You're going first. I was like, okay. So I got on the jet, sat in the toilet seat, buckled my seatbelt. And I got to tell you, for the rest of the time that we were mutually both at Mars, I got to say that, that director level guy, I wasn't his friend. He had some feelings toward me, but it was rather misplaced. Right. And it was one of those moments where, it taught me, first of all, you don't know what people are looking at. You don't know the experiences they've had in their lives. How many times had that woman been told to go sit in the back of the room? Or how many
Right.
times, had she had her ideas or what she'd been working on for months been minimized by somebody else and what they thought somebody would care about? And it struck a
Right.
chord. And she cared about her private label business and she cared about what I had to say, not because it was me, but because it was part of her business and it was solving for something that has always been so core and so important to Walmart. And so he got it really wrong.
Right.
And I don't think he ever really probably learned the full lesson. I know I did.
Too
And
much pain in the
it
moment.
was it was the craziest thing. Like the highest ranking guy, he was so nice and so kind and told me I did a great job once we were in the air and came back to the bathroom to talk to me, of course. And
Oh,
it was just like one of those like really great moments. And he said, don't let somebody ever assume that what they have to say is more important than what you have to say. Who
wow.
gets listened to is the one that wins that match. And you got listened to. Somebody wanted to hear what you had to say. And I just like it was a huge gift. And yeah, it was I still remember that gentleman very well. I remember the looks. I remember like taking off and seeing him like standing there and being like, oh man. Never being so thankful in my life to sit on a toilet for like,
Right.
an hour and a half back to Nashville.
Oh my goodness, that is fantastic. And
Oh,
what a valuable lesson to learn early. Because I think sometimes, especially in our modern world, we have such a premium placed on knowledge. We want to make
yeah,
sure we come across as the smartest person in the room. We've got
yeah,
knowledge at our fingertips. We know everything. And I as we teach executives and sales teams at our company, one of the things that we sometimes bump up against is this deep discomfort that people have with not appearing to be the smartest person in the room
that's right.
because it's almost like they've somehow absorbed the message over the decades that it's a dangerous place to be. If
Hmm.
you aren't coming across as the smartest, most confident, most well-informed person in the room,
Yep.
you're gonna lose.
Yeah,
And that's as anybody who's been in sales for more than 8 minutes can tell you, that isn't true.
that's right.
And ego can so backfire, and if you
Yeah.
try to come across as the smartest person in the room, you try to call the shots, you try to say, "That's not important," that's not a safe place to be for your revenue.
It's not. And I think, the other thing too is you're assuming that the person that you're talking to expects perfection.
Good
And, the
point.
pursuit of perfection, it's an impossible endeavor.
That's a good
Um,
point.
they want progress. They want every conversation to get a little bit further, and at the end of the day, it's a fear. It goes back to like fear-based selling. I always tell my teams, don't sell scared. Know
Oh,
your product, know your customer, know what you're walking in to do, but don't sell scared. If you start to feel it internally, stop, take a beat.
yes.
You can say you don't know. Don't lie. It's just those moments where again, you're
Wow.
dealing with another human being on the other side of the desk. They're not perfect. They will accept if you say I don't know, but I can get back to you by the end of the day, or I will get the answer from the right people. You don't have to lie and you don't have to be afraid to be caught on your heels.
Right.
Most buyers would tell you that they're buyers because they're not salespeople. But then I always remind buyers that they are salespeople, they just sell internally. And
Yes.
so it's a discussion among colleagues.
Right.
And, there's no such thing as the perfect pitch. There's no such thing as the perfect, employee, the perfect, there's going to be moments of I don't know, or it's going to make you uncomfortable, but sit in it
Right.
and be human and be humble and say I don't know, or you know what, let me just back up. Here's maybe a better way to frame up where I was trying to go or what I was trying to say. You're not going to know it all. You're a salesperson. You didn't design it, you didn't build it, you didn't manufacture it, you didn't take it over the ocean to wherever it needs to go. You're not building the brand marketing, doing the photography. You get the shiny object at the end of the day to get to present that the rest of your building has put their blood, sweat and tears into. So honor it. and honor the
Yes.
idea that the gift of time and the commodity, the precious commodity that that is, for the people who've worked to bring it to market as well as what you're doing now, it's always with another human. So be human and
Right.
make it a dialogue, serve. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. People love to tell you what they know because they
Yes.
want you to win. Nobody sits down in front of somebody else and goes, okay, I can't wait till this guy blows it and wastes my time. They
Right.
want to have a positive outcome. So, expect the best in how people will respond to you and to, things you don't know or where there are, mistakes or slip ups. Like everybody is human and nobody is expecting perfection. And nobody wants you to fail. It's a waste of their time when you fail. And it makes people uncomfortable. So everybody's rooting for you. It's
Yeah.
just you're human, you've got a human on the other side of the desk. Like be human, not perfect. Perfection doesn't exist?
What an incredible reminder. If you had a microphone, I'd encourage you to drop it.
There you go. Maybe the editors can add
Yes.
it's a
That's
challenge to the editing team.
yeah, exactly. That's incredible, and it's so it encompasses how and why there will always be a human involved in the selling role. I mean, if it can be done online with great advertising and an Amazon algorithm, go for it. But if
Mhm.
you need a human in that process, it's a role that only a human can do, and I
It's very
love
true.
that. I love
Yeah,
that. I'm
absolutely.
aware that I need to land this pet jet, and respect your time because I
Excellent callback. You're doing it.
I could keep asking you questions for hours, but I do need to land it. So in a wrap up, I will just ask
Mhm.
you one more question, and that is,
Sure.
what is one belief that executives should drop about sales? Like if you could just give a new executive, let's say a really quick single tip of how to look at the human side of their go-to-market strategy, if you could give them one piece of advice that will help protect that beautiful little machine of revenue and margins, what piece of advice would you give them about perhaps their beliefs about sales?
I'd say seek to understand. Seek to understand your customer, seek to understand the expectations for those folks that are asking you to be in front of somebody. Seek to understand what the high felt needs are or what is trying to be solved for. Seek to understand what motivates the person, the human on the other side of the desk from you, and then strive to sit on the same side of the desk as them.
Brilliant. And on that note, I gotta end it before I start asking you more questions. Sandella, thank you so much for sharing your rich insights and wisdom into the growth and the human side of going to market with sales as part of that. And we deeply, deeply appreciate the time that you've
Absolutely.
given us here. So thank you so much. And listeners, this has been an absolute blast. Please make sure you're following and subscribing to make sure that you don't miss a single one of these conversations. This has been Gold Sandilla. Thank you so much for your time, and
Yeah.
we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much. It was a blast. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.